Okay, so I've got the model to a stage where I want to start looking at some rendering using the Photoshop technique that you're looking at with Chris. And so we need at least two views. If you have a look at the brief, you can see the minimum requirement is that you have a plan view and oops, you don't need to worry about that, and an axonometric. So do you all know what an axonometric view is? Angled, yeah. Measurable. It is measurable, yep. Why is it measurable? Yeah, sorry? Yeah, it can be 45 degrees, it doesn't have to be. So the 45 is when the angles are equal, and that gives you basically an isometric. But an axonometric just needs to have a vertical axis. So the axis is at 90 degrees, and then the other angles can vary, but they often are. I'm going to do it at 45, also equal angles. And so then, well, there are other types of views, and so isometric is often similar to this. And then you can see there the plan view can be perspective. So I'll show you how to do a regular plan view, so an orthographic or orthogonal view, which is just a normal plan view, and then a perspective one as well, which is very different. So those are the minimum requirements, that you have those two views, plan and axonometric. But then Chris has maybe mentioned to you as well an elevation or a section view, which is another option. It's not required, but it's a useful thing, and it's good to try rendering in those different views and get used to the way you do shadows and shading as well, in especially side views. For interiors, sections are really, really important, probably as important as the plan. So I'll begin though with the plan view. And so you all have a plan for your lowest level. It's probably called ground floor. And so you can see here, I've got a plan, but it doesn't look fantastic because there's too much there. There are too many things that I don't want in my the plan that I'm going to take into Photoshop. So I don't want to change this view though, because I want to keep that to work with. I want to keep all these objects visible so I can easily access them when I want to do my work in Revit. So I'm going to use that method I showed you before and duplicate the view by just right-clicking on the view name, ground floor, and I will go to duplicate view and then just choose duplicate. And then you can see here I've got another ground floor copy one, which I will again right click on to choose this time rename, and call this ground floor print. And then the first thing I'll get rid of are these elevation symbols. So you can select those either by making a window around them, or even in this case just clicking onto one of them, and then when you right click you can choose hide in view category, and that will hide all of those symbols, those elevation symbols. I don't want some of these sections, but I'll leave those for a minute because I do want to keep some of the, maybe one of the section views, and I'll show you that afterwards. So I'm going to go to the reference planes, which actually don't print, but because they're fairly big, it'll be more difficult to work with them turned on. So again, I'll select one of those, right click, and then hide in view category. So I'll hide all of those. The shortcut for that, by the way, is VH. You use that one all the time. So VH hides the category of the object you've selected. And then, as I was saying, I want these sections to be hidden, but I want to keep one turned on. So none of these sections are the one that I really want to work with, or that I want to take into Photoshop. So I'm going to make a new one. Just to remind you, on the View tab, you can find the Section tool there, or it's up. You've got a shortcut up on the Quick Access toolbar as well. So with Section, I will make a section where I want it to be. printing, so just going through here. And I don't want to see the others in this floor plan. So I'll select one of those, right click, and then this time hide in view elements. So that will just hide the one that's selected. And I can select a couple of them using Control and do the same thing. Right click, hide in view elements, and the shortcut for this is EH, so that's element hide. So I now just have the one section view visible, and I will select that and break the line using that break symbol in the middle and move the ends across, tidy it up a bit, and that's fine as it is. Okay, so you can see how much cleaner the plan is there, but because you're going to do the rendering in Photoshop, you don't need to have the shading or materials showing in Revit. Revit has a full suite of materials and lots of different options for them, but again, you're doing it in Photoshop, so we'll set this to hidden line to give a clean display. The grey in the walls is actually not too bad, but you might prefer black, which I think is shown here in, well, a bit hard to see, but it looks like it's probably black. This one, I think it is. So to do that was just one thing I'll point out first. You have the detail level set to coarse initially. If you change that to fine, then you'll lose the fill in this case, because it's a fairly simple wall. So that's one option. If you want to fill the black in or do a colour for the walls in Photoshop, you can just set it to fine. But I'm going to leave it on coarse, and I'm going to change the colour in a different way. By selecting the wall, I'll go to Edit Type, and you'll see then you have a coarse scale fill pattern, which is set to solid fill, and then a coarse scale fill colour, which you can see there is grey. I'll change that to black, and well, if you can't find it over here, it might not be any custom colours. You should be able to get it. I think that's dark blue. So, yep, so that one's black, and so you can get it up there. That should be right. But again, another way is just to change the slider over there, drag that all the way to the bottom, and that'll turn it to black, no matter what the hue is, as long as you see 000 there for red, green, and blue. And so OK, and then OK again, and all of those walls will change to black because I've edited the type. So I've changed this generic 300mm wall so that all of them change to be black. Okay, so that's pretty much done, that view, and I can take it out as it is. So I'm going to go now to the main menu and choose Print. You can choose Print again if you want to, but clicking there on the button on the menu does the same thing. Print. And then I'm going to choose Adobe PDF. So like I was saying before, if you don't have that on your own computers, do a search for some free PDF converters. And I'll just remind you the one I mentioned, Primo PDF I think is okay, but try out any that you like the look of. And so, just to remind you there, I've just clicked on Setup, and there I can set the page size. So I'm going to set that to A4, and then I'm going to change it from fit to page to zoom and leave that on 100%. And then the placement I'll go to center, and then OK. And now before I make my PDF file, I'll preview. And you can see then it's not going to fit on this page size because of the scale. And so it's 1 to 100. In the brief here, you might have read that through, there's no requirement for scale. Okay, so you can do it at any scale, but it's a really good habit to get used to doing things at scale when you can. So I'm going to go back to Print here. And so to make that fit onto the page, I've got two options. If I go into setup, I can either make it not to scale. So here, zoom 100% is normally what you would want, because a plan should be at scale most of the time. But if I use fit to page, it will just fit it to an A4 page. So I'll click OK. I'm not going to save that. Preview it, and that's going to fit. But we don't know the scale. So that's one option though, and just not sure which page size Chris wants you to work with. But if he's happy to work with A4, then that's one option. The other option, back into setup, is to put it on zoom 100%, and then it will use the scale. So if you haven't changed it, it's going to be on 1 to 100. So zoom 100% will leave that scale 1 to 100, and then center is always a good option. Just make sure you check that after you change the zoom option there. And then back to here, I'll choose A3 this time. Okay, it wasn't fitting onto A4 at 1 to 100, but it should easily fit on A3. Click OK. Again, you don't need to save the print settings usually, so I'll just say no. Preview it, and it easily fits on A3. So that's what I'm going to do. Click print, and now when I click OK, then I just need to choose where that file goes and give it a name. So I'll call it Mondrian Plan Ortho. And then save. So that's going to create a PDF file and then open it for me. So you can see there the final output. So I'm happy with that. Close this, and then I'll make the other views. The other views, well, some of them are a little bit simpler. So the next one I'll do is the orthogonal. Oh no, sorry, I'll do the axonometric. Okay, so when you're clicking on the 3D house, if you're still going to your 3D view that way, what that's really doing is opening up a view in your project browser, which will probably have a name like this, 3D in those parentheses. Okay, so you see there it has that view name. And so just like the plan, I want to make a view just for printing. So I'm going to right click on that, and again duplicate view, duplicate. Then I'll right click on that new view name, rename it, and we'll call it 3D Axon. We'll call it the full name, Axonometric. Okay, so how do we make an axonometric? Well, in Revit, all of these views are axonometrics. Now, if you remember the shortcut for orbiting, you don't have to click and drag on the cube. You can hold down Shift and drag the wheel. And you can see there that basically with any angle, unless you go upside down, then it does change a little bit. But otherwise, the axis is always vertical. Okay, so you can see there, no matter which view angle, these lines are always at 90 degrees. So I'll put it right next to the edge there, so you can see no matter what my view angle is, it's always perfectly vertical. When you go upside down, it usually is as well. It's just that you can, if you really push it, you can get it to be not vertical. But basically, it's always an axonometric in those views. So that's a handy thing. And then you just need to think about the view angle. And so the cubes there, also the presets on the cube, are really good options. Using the corner sets it to an exact southwest isometric. And you can go and click through the other corners, and it will give you exact 45-degree views, which are really useful for architectural and interior design drawings. Close this thing. And also, because you only need to have an axonometric, you can try angles in between, if that is more appropriate for your design. And one thing that becomes pretty obvious once you've started modelling and doing things using a computer-based approach rather than doing it all by hand is a lot of the drawing conventions you learn when you're doing hand drafting are just that. They're just conventions. They don't really have much to do with the real world in terms of the way 3D geometry works and also the way you view and see things. So people think sometimes that these isometric views somehow relate to the way that you view buildings and other things in the real world. And they do in some cases, but only when the building is built orthogonally. If you think about it, those view directions only make sense when you're looking at walls that are at right angles to each other. So if you're basing your design on one of those other images where things are at different angles, then it probably won't make sense to have these views taken off those 90 degree or 45 degree projections, and it will probably make sense to rotate the view. It's the same with perspective drawing. People think 1-point and 2-point perspectives are a real thing you see in real life, and you do, but only with buildings where everything's at a right angle. Otherwise they don't really make a whole lot of sense. So just think about those things when you're creating your view. Once you've got the one you're happy with, set the view as well to hidden line, just like the plan. And so now I can export that and create a PDF in exactly the same way as I did the plan view. So back on the main menu, print. Now it will keep the same settings when you go to setup. It'll have the same settings you had for the plan. So if you've done that properly for the plan, you shouldn't need to change any of this. So this should work pretty well if you use A3 and then zoom 100%, or if you need to make A4, hit the page. Will work for A4. And so by clicking OK here, then it'll ask me again for a file name. So I'll call it Mondrian 3D Axon, should do. Okay, so there we are. So that's the file we'll get, and don't worry about this. Okay, so then you saw before I made a section view. So in my list of sections, it'll have the last section view I created, and you'll see that it has one extra thing that the other views didn't, and that's this crop region. So that's a border that you can use to crop things out, which is a very useful thing in Revit. But here you just need to make sure that it's big enough to show everything you want. And just be aware of it. You can use that you can turn it on in any view, but at first it will just be turned on in your section view. So just like the plan, I want to hide that section by selecting it, going to hide in view, and either elements or category would work here. And that's enough. The section, the crop border or crop region won't print. So when I go to choose print, preview, and you can see it just gives me the section without the border. So I'll click print, OK, and again give this a name. So it's just like printing really in a lot of ways. Close this, and so then finally I said I'd show you how to do a plan perspective view. Okay, and so you can create that in well, in any view almost, but it's probably easiest, believe it or not, to start in the plan view itself. So I'll go to my plan, and now I'll go to camera, and I'm just going to click to place a camera inside the space. And then here I'm going to be careful when I place the target to put it directly above the camera. So notice it's a perfectly straight line, and you have to do this by eye. It won't snap automatically, so you just have to try and keep that line as straight as you can. And then if I go to a side view, so I'll go to one of the elevations, maybe just something different, and I can see that camera now. Right, now you may lose it if you can't see the camera view. You can always show it again by right clicking on the view name, and camera views are given names like this: 3D view 1, 3D view 2, and so on as you make additional cameras. So my last camera there is 3D view 2, and I'll right click there and go to show camera. So again, I can see my camera now, and I'm going to stretch this up so that it is above the target. So it's up in the air, and I'm keeping that line straight. But, well, I'll open the camera view to show you what it's doing now. It's not really a plan perspective just yet. Remember, that was the south elevation. Now I'll go to the east elevation, and you'll see that from the side it's still viewing at an angle. So because I want it to be like a plan view, I'm going to take it so that it's directly above the target in this view as well. And you could stretch it up there, but I don't want to go too far because I want to keep the perspective fairly flat. Fairly angled. So again here, I'm just going to zoom in. You can see there it's not quite above, so I'll take it across a bit more. There we go. It's one of those things you just have to do by eye. So across a bit more. Revit doesn't give you the best camera controls, to be honest, so that's about as good as we'll get it. And then I've got to check the view depth as well. This cone of vision is basically a field of view, and also it has the view depth, so it's only going to look as far as the bottom of that triangle. So I'm going to stretch that down so that it encompasses the building again. And now let's look at it. Okay, so it is a plan view, but it's not showing the whole building or the whole space. So the final thing now is to stretch out the borders, and if you've done any photography you'll have an idea what's happening there. This is changing the field of view. So there we are. So that's a perspective plan view, which can be a really interesting view. And so again, I can export that in the same way by printing to a PDF. Okay, so main menu, print. All the settings are the same as before. If I check the setup there, and one thing might change. So I'll preview this, and no, that's okay, luckily. So I won't change any more settings. I'll just click OK there, and we'll call this 3D also Mondrian plan perspective. So that one's probably the most difficult, but worth trying. They can be really informative views, but the others are more important. And so now, just to make it clear, I'll show you those files. Okay, so I've got these PDF files, which can all be opened in Photoshop, and I'll just show you one in Photoshop. Chris will be going through all of this with you. It's not coming up here. You can get it to come up there, but if you're doing it this way, turn that option off. I'll do it in a different way anyway. Don't want to mess up the settings, so there we go. So I just want to show you how it should look in Photoshop. So if you don't have the Creative Suite, it's something I'd highly recommend you invest in. It's fairly cheap these days because of the subscription. It's I think it's $20 a month or something per student, so that's not too bad. Okay, so you can use different methods to bring these into other files, but one good way is just to open the file. So when you go to open it, I'll just choose the file. Then it will ask you for a resolution. So it wakes up. Hits load, there we go. Okay, so again, Chris, I'm sure, will give you recommendations here, but 300 usually is a good resolution. But what that's doing is rasterizing the file. So it's vectors until this point, and that's why I'm showing you this. So I'm going to click OK there, and that's going to turn my vectors into pixels. So, zooming in there, it does have all the lines, but it's got this checkerboard background to show you that it's transparent. And that's a good thing. It means when you fill in, you don't have to cut inside those lines. You can go over them and have your rendering behind the lines, and it works really well. But what I want you to do is save the file. So make sure you do a save as, and give it a new name, and save it as a Photoshop file. Don't save over the original PDF, because then you'll lose the vectors, and you'll need to recreate them if you want to bring it back in. So that's it. It's that easy to make PDFs out of Revit, and it's one of the best approaches for making line work for anything that you need to do, not just CAD drawings, but if you need to do even graphical work. CAD programs are much better at making vectors than most graphics programs, and then you can bring them into not just Photoshop, but you'll see later InDesign and even Illustrator. So I'll finish that up there. But again, also think about the fact that you're setting up views in Revit first to be ready for printing. And in this case, that means ready for making your PDFs.